Hey guys, my name's Aryan and I'm a third year medical student at the University of Leeds. I did my UCAT in the summer of 2022 and I managed to score 3,150, which was in the 98th percentile for that year. And so today, I'm going to be sharing with you guys exactly how I prepared and my best strategies and advice for each section. So I did my UCAT in late July and I started my prep around early to mid-May. So I'd say it was probably 10 or 11 weeks of prep that I did for UCAT. The UCAT examination window runs from July to around late September. So you're probably wondering why I did mine so early. So when I was applying, we actually had two tests. We had the UCAT and we had the BMAT. And so a lot of us did our exams in July so that we would have more time to prepare for the BMAT, which was around October, November time. For you guys, because you don't have the BMAT, it might be wiser to actually do it later in the summer. I think around 10 weeks is probably the right amount of time you need for the UCAT. I know various sources will say various different things, and I heard 6 weeks being thrown around a bunch. I think doing a little bit more than that is probably beneficial, and it's probably wise to then space your practice out a little bit less on each day. So it gives your brain more time to actually get used to the questions and get accustomed to the test. In May, I was not doing hours of prep a day. I would spend maybe just like 30-45 minutes here and there getting used to the questions and how they were presented in the UCAT. For my prep, me and a lot of the people I knew used Medify, which is a huge question bank online with thousands of questions about the UCAT. They have something like 22 full mock tests, which is so useful, and I think I got through quite a few of them by the end of my prep. There's also the official UCAT website, which has 4 full mock exams on there, and they have small question banks for each section. My advice would be to save most of these for the end of your prep, because these are going to be the closest thing you get to the actual exam because they're made by UCAT themselves, and you probably don't even want to be doing that many mocks at the start of your prep either. So, time pressure. We all know that the thing that makes a UCAT the hardest is the timing. Here's the timing for each section, and here's how long you have for each section, which equates to not a lot of time for each question. And so your strategy becomes even more important because you're probably not going to be able to answer every question in every section. And so my biggest piece of advice I could give you is to skip the hard questions. In the UCAT, every question is marked the same. You don't get extra marks for harder questions, except in decision making, where some of the questions are longer, so they give you 2 marks. But apart from that, everything is marked the same. So it doesn't make sense to spend 2 or 3 minutes getting a really hard question, but then running out of time towards the end, where some of the easier questions might be. How the UCAT actually works is they have a huge question bank for each section. They'll randomly give you a selection of questions from that question bank in any random order, meaning you could have a really hard question at the start and then a bunch of easier questions towards the end. It's not ordered from easiest to hardest. So if you come across a hard question, flag it and move on. Once you finish the section, it'll give you a page where you can skip right to the questions you flagged, making it super easy to then go back and tackle those questions if you have time. My second biggest tip, which I actually haven't seen anyone talk about, is what I would do for my prep is I would do my mocks at the exact time that my UCAT exam would be. So my UCAT was scheduled for 11 a.m. So how my days would work leading up to the UCAT is in the morning, I would sit down and do a mock exam at 11 a.m. I'd then have lunch at 1, and then I'd come back in the afternoon and I'd go through all of the questions that I got wrong. And I'd spend a lot of time figuring out why I got it wrong and how you get to the correct answer. Question banks like Medify are actually really good for this because they usually have an explanation telling you why they got to this answer. And so definitely at the start, it's really important to slow down once you've done some questions, look back at what you got wrong and realize how you could have gotten to the right answer. My next big tip would be to get really comfortable with the UCAT interface. UCAT is notorious for having a lot of keyboard shortcuts, which can save you a lot of time. Things like flagging questions, skipping to the next question, and definitely using the calculator in the quantitative reasoning section. In QR, UCAT gives you a virtual calculator which you can use to answer the questions, but the buttons on the calculator are actually pretty small, and it can be difficult to type in the right numbers that you want. So I would get really comfortable typing in your equations in the keypad. I actually managed to score 900 in QR. So if you want a video on how I managed to do it, let me know in the comments. But here's a full breakdown of my UCAT scores. In verbal reasoning, I got 670. In decision making, I got 750. In QR, I got 900. And in abstract reasoning, I got 830. I know VR is a little bit lower than the others. VR, in mine and many others' opinion, is the hardest section. So in 2026, verbal reasoning will consist of 44 questions and you'll have 22 minutes to answer all the questions. So you get an average of 30 seconds a question. Within VR, you'll be given 11 long passages of text with 4 questions tied to each passage. There's 2 types of questions in verbal reasoning. You'll have sections with questions with true, false, and can't tell answers, or you'll have sections with 4 different question options to choose from. 99% of the time, the true, false, and can't tell questions will be the easiest, simply because you'll only have one statement to verify, rather than going through 4 statements for each passage and then trying to find the right one. In the exam, my strategy was that I did all of the true, false, and can't tell passages first, and when I came across a difficult passage, I would flag all the questions and then come back to it at the end. And what that meant is I was able to do the easier questions first and then come back to the harder questions when I had time. Also, it's really important for verbal reasoning that you only use the information that the passage gives you, and you don't use any of your own outside knowledge when answering the questions. The goal of the section is to see how well you extract information from the passage, and so it would be an unfair advantage if you knew about what the passage was talking about anyways and someone else didn't. Different people will give you different strategies about how they actually answered each passage. This is what I did. So when I was presented with a passage, the first thing I'd do is I would quickly skim read through the entire passage in maybe 20 or 30 seconds and kind of mentally keep track of what pieces of information were where. I would then look at the right hand side of the screen at the statement that we were giving told to answer, and I would identify 1 or 2 keywords which I could then quickly go back to the passage and find. Once you find those keywords, I would then quickly skim around them to see if I could find the relevant information and then answer the question. That was my strategy, but there's a lot of different strategies that you could use. Some people don't even read the passage at all to begin with and just look straight at the question and then try and find the keywords. But it's important that you figure out what strategy works best for you, and the best way to do that is just keep practicing and see what works best for you. Now on to decision making. DM is basically just a bunch of logical puzzles that you're given to solve. I wouldn't say there was really a major strategy for decision making. I would definitely skip the harder questions again, because some of the puzzles in decision making can be quite tricky. In decision making, there are questions that are worth more points than others. These are the questions at the start of the passage where you'll get 5 different statements and you'll have to answer. And these questions you can get 2 points for. And if you get maybe 4 out of 5 of the statements correct, you can actually score partial marking, where you get half the points for the question. But apart from that, all of the other questions are worth the same amount. So again, if you come across a hard question, there is no point spending tons of time trying to solve it, when you could be spending that time tackling the easier questions. You don't have to answer every question in the UCAT. Next is QR. The main thing about QR is being able to do a lot of mental maths very quickly. There'll be tons of questions where you have to convert from one unit to another, and apart from that, you can pretty much answer the questions just by using the calculator. In the UCAT, you should also get a small whiteboard and pen, which you can use to kind of jot down some of your working, which can help you to answer the questions. Like I said before, it's probably a good idea to get comfortable with typing in what you want to put in the calculator, rather than having to use the mouse and click it in. If you practice, it will save you a lot of time. The main thing with QR is just practice. The last section is SJT, which I haven't really talked about because it is technically less important than the other passages. How it works is you get scored from band 1 all the way down to band 4. In SJT, as long as you get band 1 or 2, there is pretty much no difference between them. And in 2025, 21% of candidates got band 1 and 39% got band 2. So 60% in total scored band 1 or 2. For SJT, you have a load of ethical scenarios where you have to figure out what the correct mode of action is in each situation. Honestly, as long as you just use your common sense, you should be fine. But I'd probably recommend practicing, because in some situations, the GMC is kind of strict about which course of action is best over others, and multiple options can sound correct, but obviously only one can be the right answer. Here's a couple of final tips. I would not do any prep on the day before your exam. I know that might make a few people anxious, but a lot of the UCAT is just how fast your brain operates. And if you're doing tons of practice for weeks before the exam, you can get tired, which can affect your performance on exam day. So that being said, I wouldn't go crazy with the prep on each day. In the peak of my prep, I would do 1 mock a day in the morning, go through it in the afternoon, and then maybe do a couple of extra questions where I thought I needed to improve. That's why I'd recommend starting earlier and spreading it out over a longer period of time, rather than trying to cram it all in 4 or 6 weeks. When you actually go to do your exam, you're usually not allowed to bring anything in with you, including things like water bottles. So I know this might sound weird, but try and simulate your environment as best as you can towards the actual UCAT. Like I said, I would usually do my mocks at around 11 AM, which is when my actual UCAT was scheduled for. I'd have a little whiteboard and pen, and I would do it as if I was doing the real thing. That made me a lot more comfortable on exam day. The final thing is, don't stress about it too much. Yes, it is an important exam, but even if your score isn't as strong as you would have liked, there are tons of universities that put less weighting on the UCAT as well. If you found this video helpful, watch this one next. And thanks so much for watching, guys.